A sealed envelope, yellowed with time, was hidden away in a vault beneath Windsor Castle. No one was meant to see it until now. Leaked by a palace insider, its contents have left the monarchy reeling. A letter in Prince Philip's own handwriting, signed, dated, and brutally clear. The crown must protect Catherine. But what drove him to write this final plea? And why now? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The leak didn't come from outside. That much was certain. The letter, stored within a sealed file marked "Private for Eyes Only," was never logged in the Royal Archive's official records. It was uncovered by a palace insider, someone with high clearance and a guilty conscience. The source didn't come forward publicly, but their information reached the press through a carefully orchestrated release. At first, it was dismissed as yet another conspiracy theory. But everything changed the moment handwriting analysts from the Royal Forensics Office confirmed its authenticity. The looping cursive, the sharp underlines, the distinct pressure marks on the parchment, every detail aligned with Prince Philip's known writing style. There was no denying it anymore. The letter was real. It had been hidden in one of the oldest vaults beneath Windsor, among rarely accessed documents and relics dating back centuries. Inside the envelope was a folded note, marked with Philip's personal seal, the kind only used on documents he deemed of national importance. Written in black ink, with the blunt precision that defined his character, the letter bore a chilling header, to be opened only if the line is threatened. That line, as the content soon revealed, was not just the royal bloodline, but the monarchy's future itself. Philip's words didn't hint. They struck. He warned of betrayal from within. He cautioned against complacency. And above all, he issued one final order: Catherine must be protected. Within hours of the leak reaching the press, the internet caught fire. Anonymous insiders began whispering of a cover-up. "A royal bombshell," one tabloid screamed. Social media exploded with theories. Was this a deathbed confession? A strategic last move? Or had the Duke of Edinburgh seen something so disturbing that he crafted this letter in secret as his final safeguard? Meanwhile, behind the gilded walls of Buckingham and Clarence House, chaos erupted. King Charles, reportedly blindsided, summoned his most trusted aides into an emergency meeting. He demanded to know how the document had slipped through the cracks and who exactly had dared to expose it now. The source of the leak became a high-priority target, but not before the damage was done. The press had the letter, the world had questions, and the royal family had no answers. But this wasn't just a sentimental note, it was a coded warning, a final move in a centuries-old chess game Philip had been quietly playing, and at its center was Catherine. Behind his cold demeanor and stoic presence, Prince Philip harbored deep concerns about the future of the crown. He watched the institution fracture from within Harry's exit, Andrew's disgrace, Camilla's ascent. But it was Catherine he saw as the linchpin of survival and the target of a silent campaign to erase her influence. For years, Prince Philip maintained a calculated silence. He believed in duty, in restraint, in letting the institution speak for itself. But privately, he was far from passive. In hushed corners of Balmoral and behind tightly closed doors at Windsor, he voiced unease about the shifting dynamics surrounding the monarchy. His distrust of Camilla's growing court wasn't theatrical, it was tactical. According to close aides, Philip saw it not just as a threat to tradition, but to the crown's strategic survival. Camilla's influence, he felt, was emotional, not constitutional. She appealed to Charles's need for comfort, not his responsibility to reign. And in Philip's worldview, that imbalance could rot the monarchy from the inside out. In one startling private conversation, later documented in royal briefings, he reportedly told a senior courtier, "It's no longer about continuity, it's becoming personal." And that's dangerous. As time passed, Prince Philip's admiration for Catherine only deepened. She didn't seek attention. She didn't leak. She didn't rebel. She studied. She endured. His diary entries, quietly recovered after his death, revealed a side of him rarely seen: a grandfather who saw in Catherine not just a future queen, but a rare stabilizer in an increasingly erratic monarchy. In one entry, dated just months after her marriage to William, he wrote, "She has the poise the others pretend to have. She waits while they stumble. That makes her dangerous in the best possible way." That early foresight soon turned into private counsel. He began subtly guiding Catherine through the internal storms, always urging her to hold her position without retaliation. He respected her silence, but he also feared that silence would one day become her undoing. Tensions mounted when it became clear Charles was restructuring the crown not by tradition, but by desire. Philip disagreed with what he described as the softening of the monarchy to suit modern comforts. It was an open secret that he opposed Charles's leniency on protocol and his tolerance for Camilla's behind-the-scenes maneuverings. According to a leaked memo from a staff member, a particularly fierce row erupted between father and son after Philip learned that several of Catherine's proposed initiatives were delayed or denied without explanation. It was then that he began warning those closest to him. Without Catherine, the house collapses into sentiment. In his view, Catherine wasn't just popular, she was essential. Her influence balanced the emotional indulgence rising within the inner circle. She was the firewall between public adoration and internal collapse. Recognizing the slow corrosion of royal order, Philip reached out quietly to Princess Anne and Sophie. These private talks, often taking place during official visits or quiet retreats, centered around a single theme: protecting the lineage. He feared that if Charles continued to prioritize affection over architecture, the monarchy's foundation would slip. And it wasn't paranoia. Rumors had long circulated that Camilla's team was aggressively reshaping narratives, suggesting new protocols, influencing press access, even redirecting resources away from the Cambridges to bolster her own court. More than once, insiders alleged, Philip personally intervened to block these moves, calling them transparent attempts to reorganize loyalty under the guise of modernization. He was no stranger to palace intrigue, but this, he felt, was different. This was sabotage. But if Philip saw Catherine as the monarchy's anchor, what threat did he believe she needed protection from, and how close was that danger? While the world praised her poise, Catherine was battling demons behind palace walls: whispers, cold shoulders, strategically leaked scandals. And behind them all, a shadowy figure determined to dim her rising light. Philip had seen it all before, and this time he vowed not to stay silent. The departure of Harry and Meghan had left a noticeable vacuum inside the royal corridors, and in that silence, Catherine found herself increasingly alone. The once supportive camaraderie within the younger generation of royals dissolved into frost. With the Sussexes gone and the focus narrowing, all eyes turned to her, but not with admiration. Instead, scrutiny, jealousy, and quiet sabotage crept into the frame. Inside those marble-lined halls, isolation wasn't overt, it was orchestrated. Courtiers who once championed her initiatives suddenly delayed them. Invitations were conveniently misplaced, and when she spoke, responses were rehearsed, cold, calculated. It wasn't just indifference, it was strategy. Whispers of control began surfacing around Camilla's growing influence, particularly her staff's apparent grip over royal press channels. Multiple sources hinted that requests for coverage of Catherine's appearances were reallocated in favor of Camilla's engagements. This slow erasure of visibility was not accidental. It was deliberate, precise, and executed with plausible deniability. The press grew oddly quiet on Catherine's milestones, while glowing pieces about Camilla's modern royal approach flooded tabloid columns. And then came the rumors, subtle at first, then more cutting. Talk of Catherine being unwell, whispers about her mental state, insinuations that she was under strain or struggling with duty. These weren't planted by outsiders. They were traced, disturbingly, back to internal communications. There was no mistaking it. Someone wanted her diminished. Inside the palace, William was said to be livid, but his fury was muted by the unwritten code of royal discretion. His hands were tied. He couldn't publicly defend his wife without risking further division. Privately, he voiced his frustration, but every time he tried to push back, The walls only tightened. He reportedly told a trusted aide, "She's being edged out, and I can't even prove it." His helplessness grew alongside Catherine's silence, and the weight of it nearly crushed them both. It all came to a breaking point during a Christmas retreat at Sandringham. Catherine, once the embodiment of composure, broke down in tears during a private walk with Sophie Wessex. That moment, quietly relayed through whispered accounts, became a turning point. Sophie, shaken, later described it as, "The first time I saw her crack." The weight of duty, the constant maneuvering, the steady isolation, it had all finally surfaced. But someone else had seen it coming. Prince Philip, though frail and rarely seen in public by then, still had eyes everywhere. Reports later confirmed that he had summoned 2 senior courtiers to his private quarters weeks before his death. He confronted them not with anger, but with devastating clarity. "You're watching her drown and saying nothing," he allegedly told them. Silence is sabotage. That confrontation wasn't recorded, but the aftermath was undeniable. And it was shortly after that moment that he began drafting what would become his most explosive final act. He wasn't just reacting to cruelty, he was anticipating betrayal. Because he knew Catherine would never speak for herself, but he could speak for her through one letter, hidden away, built to detonate when the time was right. And yet, while others turned a blind eye, Philip was writing, crafting a letter that would outlive him and one day blow the lid off everything. What exactly did Prince Philip write in his final private communiqué? More than just a protective note, it was a damning analysis, a veiled command, and a coded map of royal survival. The contents, once exposed, sent shockwaves through the monarchy's most guarded chambers. The letter was anything but sentimental. Every sentence carved through the polished veneer of the palace like a blade. "The crown is not a comfort, it is a war," he wrote, opening with a warning that felt less like a reflection and more like a prophecy. It was not an emotional farewell. It was a battle cry, one that named names, challenged loyalties, and dismantled illusions. Deep within its folds, Philip exposed what he viewed as the rot, threatening to consume the institution from within. He did not mince words. Courtiers long assumed untouchable were branded as enablers. Private advisors were labelled strategic liabilities. And in one line that has already echoed across every royal hall, "The greatest threat comes not from outsiders, but within our drawing rooms." It wasn't a metaphor. It was a mirror, one the senior royals were no longer able to avoid. Among those spared from scrutiny, only one name received open and repeated praise: Catherine. Philip described her as possessing an unmatched constitutional temperament, lauding her clarity, discipline, and instinct for discretion. In contrast, others were accused of diluting legacy for the sake of affection and convenience. It was a direct challenge to King Charles, though he was never mentioned by name. The subtext screamed through every word. Philip demanded that the crown stop being treated as a personal inheritance and return to its purpose as a shield for the nation's spirit. In a particularly searing paragraph, he wrote, "The line must endure, but it cannot if it bends to every breeze. Decide between legacy or loyalty to affection, there is no both." Those closest to the king reportedly described him as devastated upon reading that passage. But the damage was done. Philip had thrown down the gauntlet from beyond the grave. Buried in the final lines was a command few expected. Philip instructed that an identical copy of the letter be preserved in the royal archives, sealed, hidden, and accessible for her eyes alone. Her, in this case, was unmistakably Catherine. It was a gesture of trust, a final act of protection. Not only was she the focus of the letter's message, she was its intended heir. The letter was a blueprint, not just for survival, but for ascension. It wasn't written to preserve the past, it was written to weaponize the future. But who was meant to receive this letter, and who intercepted it? The answer would trigger one of the palace's darkest internal reckonings in decades. Someone had held the letter for years, someone with access, with motive, and with fear. Now that their identity is exposed, the palace wants them silenced. But their confession has already gone public, and it paints a portrait of a monarchy tearing itself apart. For nearly 3 years, the letter remained in the shadows, sealed, protected, and hidden in plain sight by one of the monarchy's most trusted inner circle aides, a discreet, meticulous figure who had served Prince Philip with unwavering loyalty for decades and held close ties to Princess Anne. This wasn't just a staffer, it was someone who had shared strategy, secrets, and silence with the late Duke of Edinburgh. Their decision to break that silence wasn't impulsive. It was the result of watching history repeat itself, watching a new generation, Catherine, in particular, be fed to the wolves, while the institution stood back and watched. According to their own words, they couldn't allow that to happen again. I watched what they did to Diana. I saw the whispers, the traps, the abandonment, and it was starting again. Only this time, Philip had already seen it coming and left behind a warning no one wanted read. This anonymous protector, now reluctantly thrust into the spotlight, didn't just leak the letter. They released audio diaries, private recordings made during Philip's final months. The tapes, raw and sobering, hint at secret meetings between senior aides and representatives from Clarence House. One clip allegedly captures a discussion about reframing public narrative and redirecting Catherine's position in succession optics. Though names were muffled, intentions were not. These tapes ignited a storm. Within hours of the release, Palace lawyers issued a formal statement condemning the leak and threatening legal action for unauthorized disclosure of royal correspondence and private recordings. But the court of public opinion had already shifted. The question wasn't whether the documents were real, it was why the palace had buried them, and what it feared most if the public knew. In a written statement sent to several media outlets, the aide, still choosing to remain unnamed, declared, "Philip warned us. No one listened. He said it would come to this, and still, they chose silence. I won't be part of that anymore." The letter, they insisted, was never meant to be forgotten or filed away in bureaucratic limbo. It was a contingency plan. A final act of foresight from a man who had long understood the inner mechanics of power and betrayal, a plan that was meant to activate the moment Catherine's position was no longer safe. That moment, in their eyes, had arrived. Now, the public knew, but what about those behind the crown? As the truth spread, one figure emerged from the shadows, ready to fight back. She had always been the monarchy's iron backbone, but now Princess Anne was done watching. Armed with Philip's words and her own fury, she marched into the king's chambers and delivered an ultimatum no one expected from the family's quiet enforcer. For decades, Anne had been the one who never flinched, the one who upheld the crown without complaint, without scandal, and without expectation of reward. But when the letter emerged, and the fallout threatened to swallow Catherine whole, Anne transformed from silent strength to roaring sentinel. She stormed past the usual pleasantries, refusing the diplomatic route the palace had relied on for damage control. Her voice, calm but cold, cut through the confusion in Charles's private office as she laid out her demands with terrifying precision. Catherine, she said, was no longer just the future consort. She was the symbol of the monarchy's endurance, and if she fell, the crown would follow. Anne called for immediate security measures for Catherine and her children. Not in theory, not on paper now. Private guards, vetted by her own team. Surveillance reviewed hourly. Travel cleared and protected. There would be no delay. Not this time. Then came the confrontation that rocked the inner circle. Anne accused Charles directly not of ill intent, but of weakness. She said he was erasing Philip's legacy for comfort, surrendering the structure Philip spent decades protecting in favor of appeasing Camilla's rise and playing peacemaker in a house divided by ambition. It wasn't a personal insult, it was a strategic slap. A reminder that leadership came with sacrifice, not self-indulgence. And she didn't stop there. Anne quietly assembled a small alliance, a private council away from the prying eyes of Clarence House. Edward, Sophie, Beatrice, loyalists who understood that this was no longer a family dispute, it was a war for the soul of the monarchy. Together, they began reviewing years of internal documents, probing one question: How far had Camilla's reach extended? And more importantly, who had helped her? Within days, Anne ordered a full audit of all communications between Camilla's office and the Royal Press Corps. Private messages, briefing notes, media coordination, all placed under scrutiny. The move sent shockwaves through the palace. Staffers panicked, reports leaked, and then came the line that would reverberate through the monarchy's deepest cracks. Multiple sources confirmed Anne looked Charles in the eye and said, "He wrote it for you, and you failed him." No royal response was issued, no denial released. Silence, in this case, said everything. The palace was cracking from within. By week's end, Catherine was quietly moved to Sandringham under new security detail. The public didn't notice. The media wasn't informed. But insiders knew the shift was strategic. She was being removed from reach, protected not just from the press, but from whispers, sabotage, and betrayal. Anne had done what Philip could not in life, put herself between Catherine and the storm. But even with Anne's intervention, the tides weren't turning fast enough until Catherine herself made a rare move that changed everything. She had always played the long game, graceful, measured, silent. But now, with her back against the wall and Philip's final letter in her hands, Catherine stepped into the spotlight and revealed the truth she had hidden for years. The royal calendar had listed it as a routine engagement, a cultural gala celebrating British heritage. But there was nothing routine about what unfolded that night. Catherine arrived alone. No Charles. No Camilla. No entourage from Clarence House. Her presence was striking not because of spectacle, but because of solitude. She walked into that hall not as a guest of the monarchy, but as its embodiment. And then she spoke. For just under 6 minutes, Catherine delivered a speech that would ripple across the monarchy like an earthquake. With poised delivery and sharpened precision, she spoke of loyalty, of endurance, of those who protect the crown, not through noise, but through sacrifice. She never said names. She didn't have to. Every word was a mirror held up to a kingdom unraveling. Every pause was a reckoning. The reaction was instant. Social media erupted, dubbing her the true queen within hours. Clips of the speech were replayed across platforms, dissected, praised, and weaponized. Hashtags surged. Editors revised headlines mid-print. She hadn't defied the monarchy, she had redefined it. Catherine didn't plead for sympathy. She didn't seek vengeance. She claimed the moral ground and refused to step off it. And in doing so, she left the palace scrambling. Within 24 hours, a statement was issued by Royal Communications, labeling the moment a misinterpretation. But by then, it was far too late. The footage had already gone viral, and worse, for the Crown emails began to surface. Leaked from inside the palace's own comms department, the emails painted a portrait of desperation. Senior aides debated removing the video. Others argued for an emergency press correction. Some even suggested distancing Charles and Camilla from the event altogether. But the common thread in every message was fear. Fear that Catherine's quiet defiance had not only exposed internal fractures, but repositioned her beyond control. She was no longer just the future queen consort. She had become the symbol of a wounded monarchy's last hope. Behind the scenes, Catherine made another move, one the public wasn't meant to see. She held private meetings with senior legal advisors. Not palace counsel, her own. The reason wasn't disclosed, and when pressed, her spokesperson declined to comment. But speculation ran wild. Was she securing protection for her children? Preparing for a legal defense? Or was she laying the groundwork for something even more strategic? One insider hinted at a long overdue clarification of roles and rights. Whatever it was deliberate, calculated, and entirely her own. But while the world rallied behind her, a final twist loomed, a message from beyond the grave that would cement Catherine's role forever. Just when the monarchy thought the worst was over, another letter surfaces dated weeks before his death. It wasn't just a message, it was a will, a challenge, and a trap. Prince Philip had one final card to play, and it would force the royal family to choose sides. The first letter had rocked the monarchy. But the second? It detonated everything. Hidden not in a vault, not in the archives, but buried inside an obscure estate ledger belonging to one of Philip's private holdings, the document was uncovered by none other than Princess Beatrice. She had been conducting a quiet audit of her late grandfather's personal properties, assisting a legal team with transferring assets, when she found the folded parchment wedged between finance reports and land titles. Unlike the formal structure of the first, this letter was handwritten on plain stationery, dated precisely 21 days before his passing, but it wasn't an informal note. It was deliberate, structured, loaded with consequence. The title? Contingency 2. In the event of continued institutional failure. The contents revealed what many feared Philip had anticipated, that his first letter might be ignored. This one served as his final insurance. In stark language, he outlined a contingency plan, should Catherine face continued internal pressure, betrayal, or exile. It was not merely a call for protection, it was a demand for accountability. The Duke listed specific individuals he believed would act in bad faith, and stated that if Catherine's position were compromised, they were to be dishonoured from royal duty by force of sovereign law. Their names, now known to those within the palace, remain sealed from the public for now. But the phrase that chilled every reader came in the closing paragraph. The monarchy endures only when its soul is guarded. Strip it of that, and we are nothing but titles and ghosts. Charles reportedly broke down in tears after reading the second letter. According to 2 senior aides present during its reading, he clutched the paper, whispering over and over, "He never trusted me." The letter was a blow not just to his leadership, but to his conscience. Philip had seen what was coming, and had chosen to trust his granddaughter-in-law more than his own son. The pain of that realization, witnesses say, left the king visibly shaken and uncharacteristically silent for days. Beatrice, recognizing the storm the letter would unleash, didn't hand it over to Charles or the palace. She took it directly to Catherine. No fanfare, no announcement. Just a sealed envelope handed from one woman to another behind the locked doors of Sandringham. Catherine read it in full silence, then reportedly whispered only one word. He knew. The moment, quiet as it was, marked a turning point. Catherine now held not just Philip's trust, but his last weapon. And as the crown reels from Philip's posthumous wrath, one question remains: what happens now that the public knows the truth? The monarchy stands on a precipice. Its hidden wars are now public, its alliances exposed. Catherine has become more than a future queen, she's a symbol of survival, of dignity, and of a legacy Prince Philip died protecting. But the enemies within the palace haven't disappeared. The question isn't whether Catherine will rise, it's how far her enemies will fall. Across the nation and beyond, a shift is underway. The people, once divided by loyalty, are uniting behind a singular figure, Catherine. Her composure, her silence turned strength, her refusal to buckle under the weight of betrayal, all of it has redefined what leadership looks like within the House of Windsor. Polls show a dramatic surge in public support. News outlets, once complicit in echoing palace narratives, are now heralding her as the embodiment of modern royalty. The phrase "queen in everything but name" dominates headlines. But inside the palace walls, the atmosphere is far from celebratory. It's panic. Camilla's influence, once expanding unchecked, is beginning to crack. Several of her senior aides have been quietly removed from their posts, reassigned to roles far from public scrutiny. Internal memos leaked to sympathetic journalists suggest a targeted effort to reduce her public visibility, a slow, silent retreat disguised as restructuring. But it's not just Camilla who's losing ground. In the wake of Philip's letters, a new advisory circle has formed a power block of resilience and reform. Led by Princess Anne, Catherine, and Princess Beatrice, this trio now holds informal authority over public image, institutional memory, and strategic alliances. Their rise hasn't been declared. It hasn't needed to be. Their decisions are already being executed. Behind closed parliamentary doors, quiet conversations are unfolding, Conversations about succession, about law, about legacy. Some insiders suggest that contingency plans are being redrawn to reflect the overwhelming public consensus. A few go further, whispering about a possible early transition of power. Charles, weary, exposed, and increasingly isolated, faces pressure not just from the outside world, but from within his own bloodline. Advisors are split, some urging him to hold firm, others pushing for a dignified step back to preserve what little stability remains. For the first time in decades, the idea of reform isn't seen as rebellion, it's seen as survival. And then there's the question that no one dares ask aloud, but everyone thinks about. Is Catherine preparing to take the throne sooner than anyone expected? Her meetings, her alliances, her silence, it all feels strategic. Not ambitious, but protective. Not political, but necessary. The monarchy may be crumbling in places, but the path she's walking is made of steel. Not because she sought it, but because Prince Philip prepared her for it. Prince Philip's secret letter was never meant to be seen. But now that it has, the question echoes across the kingdom: who truly deserves the crown? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.